Hi, my name is Barbie, and this is my story, Past the Pecan Tree. A new day, new questions to spin round my mind. I checked every corner, but a sane thought I couldn't find. Sanity was a thing of the past for me, something I hadn't had past the pecan tree. On the other side of that pecan tree are the fears, lies, and doubts of my enemy, whispered into the ears of a small little girl, changing her vision and changing her world. The world was unusually dark on my side of the tree, shattered lives all hidden so no one would see. Hidden in the heart of a child filled with fear, accusations always thundering in her tiny ears. My fault, this must be my fault. If I could somehow fix it, the darkness would halt. No matter how I planned or reasoned or schemed, fear still came and stole all of my dreams. Fear that I was bad and guilty and stained, wrong touches by many, leaving my soul pained. Rage, shame, anger, anxiety, all I know. My playmates from young, they watched me grow. On the other side of the pecan tree was my friend Mike. Every day we played ball, we fought, or we hiked, exploring the woods and learning about life, neither of us speaking of our homes filled with strife. We both just knew and silently stood together, and there were many storms that we had to weather. Secrets behind our closed doors, horrible things that the enemy had in store. We played together for years and years. I spent the night when I couldn't overcome my fears. His mom was a comfort and took me as her own, despite the places her mind sometimes roamed. My mom, Mike's mom, two women in pain, children at home, lost in their reign, the reign of their own sorrows and past, each hoping that this day might be their last. Friday morning I walked past the pecan tree, picked up Mike for school, and what did I see? His mom on the porch with a vacant look in her eyes. I didn't speak of it. I didn't even try. You see, Mike came out late that day for school. We argued about it and I lost my cool. I told him I hated him and wasn't coming over that night. He kind of just laughed and said that'll be all right. The rest of the day I tried to talk to him. He said, "You hate me, remember?" with a slight grin. I don't remember walking home that day. I had no idea my world was about to be gray. I indeed stayed at home that Friday night, awaking in the dark with terror and fright. I heard a gunshot, but my house was asleep. I forgot about that for a couple of weeks. Saturday morning, and I had softball to play. My friend Stacy walked to get me that day. We stopped at Mike's and knocked on the door. I opened his window, pulled his sheets on the floor. He never answered, so I went to my game, and for the first time, both my parents came. In between games, I went home with a friend, and the world as I knew it was about to end. We sat at her bar, and then the phone rang. Why was my stomach immediately filled with pain? I heard Kathy's dad say, both of them, Mike too. As my mind screamed denial, my spirit already knew. For a moment I begged for it to be another Mike, not my soulmate, since we were just tykes. Her dad poured us both 2 glasses of wine. Kathy drank hers, but I refused mine. Get on with it, my mind screamed, my world turning into the place of bad dreams. Phyllis and Mike, both of them dead, both of them with a gunshot in their head. I had another game to play that day. I incoherently muttered, I just want to play. Play ball and stop the insanity in my mind. My ears gone deaf, my eyes gone blind. Got to the field surrounded by friends. The truth on their faces made my mind bend. I crumbled to the ground as the reality hit me. I wanted to run. I wanted to flee. I came to myself and said I just have to play ball. Anything to not drink this cup of bitter gall. Alas, as I stood on third base to forget, along came the hearse and made it all legit. Don't look, my mind screamed and I lifted my chin. Then it was my turn to bat again. I hit the ball and ran to first base, knocked down by the ball and hit in the face. I'm safe, I screamed as I jumped to my feet. My nose was broken. I was white as a sheet. Blood began to pour and my eyes began to swell. They laid me on the bench, and I was back in hell. As long as I played ball, I could refuse to think, forget about the life that was taken in a blink. I opened my eyes, and my dad had appeared. I saw in those eyes the truth I had feared. As details of the horror began to come out, I wanted to run screaming. I wanted to shout. This can't be. It's all a nightmare, and I will awake. But reality isn't something that you can just shake. Phyllis killed Mike, then she lay down and died. 2 bullets and a gun had ended their life. Her son Timmy had found them instead of me, another part of the guilt that wouldn't set me free. I walked to school on Monday, just as before, But this time Mike would not come out that door. I left school on Monday, walking home alone. I think it was probably then that my mind began to roam. I would pick up the phone and dial Mike's number, remember he was dead, and wake from my slumber. When I went to sleep, the nightmares began. Saving Mike was always a part of my dream's plan. No matter how I tried, I could never save him. I would wake up as my mind continued to spin. I could barely walk over that hill every day and see that house filled with death and decay. The decay of my sanity started that year as I began to play games to cope with my fear. I would leave my house and count my steps to school, trying not to look up, not to lose my cool. Some days I would forget for just a minute, pause outside his house, then remember he wasn't in it. The horror would come crashing back in, and I was strapped in the roller coaster once again. For months my friend Rhonda spent the night with me, as I was stuck in what happened past the pecan tree. I finally decided that I would commit suicide. It was the only way that I saw to get off of this terrible ride. It would look like an accident, so my mom wouldn't know. She had enough pain without me dealing this blow. Home alone and locked in the bathroom one night, I got at the nerve and overcame my fright. But before I could do myself in, I opened up my Bible searching for him. It opened to Psalm 139, and what did I see? That no matter where I was, God was with me. He was there, in the dark and the light. It seemed impossible, but I knew it was right. The words on the page had changed my mind, and in my dark, a tiny light shined. Just enough to find my way out of death, enough for me not to take my own breath. Somewhere in the dark of my home and my soul, I held the dice close, and I refused to roll. I refused to take chances or trust anyone at all. Even God himself had watched me fall. So I'd make my own choices and find my own way. When we are our captain, a heavy price must be paid. Later I married and had children of my own, but deep in my soul there was always a stone. Successful by day and afraid by night, my world continued to be filled with fright. Run away, but where do you go when your own mind traps you in the rabbit hole? Mania and depression, a cycle that's never ending. Craziness, the message your mind is always sending. Playing games to forget the horror that it knows. Wearing a plastic face, hoping it never shows. The details of the pain hidden so carefully away. A whole life forgotten so I could continue to play. I forgot my whole life in the recesses of my mind. To the truth of it all, I was completely blind. I didn't deserve love, so I didn't choose well, ensuring that I would stay locked in this hell. My parents both became new people in Christ, but my childhood was still the victim of a heist. Mostly stolen by fears and lies and doubts, I kept telling myself what I was truly about. We never spoke of what happened to Mike. Everyone went silent, afraid of what they might spike. Only in my nightmares did he come out to play, year after year, no matter how I prayed. Almost 3 decades later, and 2 lifetimes crumbled, like a blind boxer I fell and continually stumbled, beating the air and I knew not what, chains on my mind, a knife in my gut. 3 sons of my own, but they seemed far away. I had long since forgotten how to really play. My boys grew up and saw all of my pain, my days filled with sunshine, my nights filled with rain. The rain of mental illness from living in rage and fear, a lifetime of refusing to shed another tear. Enough, I screamed out to God. What do you want from me? And quietly and gently, he whispered, everything. And so it began, the sweeping of my mind, all of the things that had kept me so blind. The truth began to come out in my life, and I saw that I had chosen a home filled with strife. Repeating the pain of the very thing I had tried to flee, living the same life as behind the pecan tree. God brought me a friend to lead me out of the dark, the life flame inside me, barely a spark. Gently, gently he took me back in time, as he showed me the reason for my life's rhyme. He took me back to another character in my story, the one that first told me all about his glory. Her name was Lorena, and she lived by the pecan tree. She told me about a man, said he could set me free. She taught Mike and I both about heaven and hell. In an old rusty car, we listened and we fell. I fell into faith, but Mike fell into fear. He had nightmares of flames, that's all he could hear. Me and Mike, trapped in that car through his death, then he left me for heaven, while I lived in hell's breath. 27 years later, I was a preacher by trade. That old rusty car and Mike's memory had begun to fade. I preached about a hope that I had never really known, building on sinking sand while I told of the cornerstone. One day as I lay me down to sleep, I awakened with a dream I knew was for keeps. I dreamt of my past, and I dreamt of a bridge to cross. It was April 17th, 2011, and my whole life was a loss. I recorded the dream, knowing it was divine, at the time so desperate to feel attached to the vine. A preacher without faith is a sad thing indeed, when the pain in your heart is a continual bleed. God took me to a dirt road, far away from home, to show me the place where my mind had first begun to roam. I found huge thorns, and I remembered his crown. Thorns that pierced my mind, that's what I had found. Places in my brain that would never be the same. The holes and the scars would on this earth remain. This was my cross, my burden to bear, but finally I knew that it was one that was shared. Shared by the King as he suffered and died. He told me the truth and how the enemy had lied. For the first time I screamed out, and I spoke to Mike with the words of a woman, no longer a tyke. I saw the truth then, that it was never my fault. I was a child, and now the lies must come to a halt. I began to see then that Mike was with me, in my heart and in every forgotten memory. I began to heal and got out of the night rain, choosing life instead of the perpetual pain. The Holy Spirit whispered to me out of the blue, "Good works, which I prepared in advance for you." I drove to my sister's and then the phone rang. My life changed again, with a different gun bang. Lorena's daughter had been killed in a car wreck. My nephew had found her, and my mind was in check. Checkmate, nowhere to run from this pain so familiar. A young life taken in tragedy was way too similar. I went to the church, filled with my townspeople. So much pain gathered there under that steeple. One of the mourners was my very own son. As I whispered words to him, I was coming undone. I drove back to my mother's, on the other side of that tree. I walked through the door and I fell to my knees. "No, no," I screamed at the heavens above. "You tell me how this is a picture of your love. Not Lorena's baby girl, not this tragedy." I screamed all the things that were also about me. The words that as a young girl in that house were stifled, held hostage by grief's unwavering rifle. My sanity began to flee again there in that living room, when once again God whispered and lowered the boom. I beat the floor with my fist as I cried for my town. This was a road too many times I'd already been down. I screamed and I cried when out of the blue, "Good works, which I have prepared in advance for you." My screaming halted right then and right there. I had to get back to the church. I had to share. I had to share from that place of my pain. My own son was standing there in death's rain. I held my dear son, my nephew, and my sister too, and knew that this was what I was created to do. From my own pain, I knew how to minister. Mike's death, now glorious, no longer sinister. Cameron was killed in a car wreck that day. Somehow I heard her laugh, and I knew she still played. Played as she always had, but this time with her Lord. Only God knows the wonder that girl had in store. I knew that she lived, with more life than us all. And if she lived, then Mike lived. And I began to fall out of the delusion, fall out of the rain. The sun finally shone on all my years of pain. It was April 17th, 2012, 1 year from my dream of the bridge I was to cross, when finally I could lean into Christ, thankful for the tragedy and tears, releasing a lifetime of sorrow and fears. An old rusty car, with Mike, Lorena, and me. 28 years later, that would set me free. They live, those beyond the veil. Unbelief had kept me trapped in a never-ending hell. Now Cameron and Mike both played with the Master, a glorious thing in the midst of our earthly disaster. We mourn here as they live on, laughing in glory. There was never an end to their life story. As my town and I grieve for this beautiful girl, I was born anew into a whole different world. I crossed that bridge into a mind now set free, and finally, flew past that old pecan tree.